Hi, everybody. Welcome. Tons to talk about today. I want to jump right into the conversation about building on Bitcoin, the reason we're all here, and how that has changed so dramatically since the foundation of Bitcoin in late 2008 and the genesis following that in early 2009. But what has changed and what does it mean to build on Bitcoin now, here in 2023, that's different than the years previous? When we take a step back in time, we've gone through three major decade-long cycles, the fourth of which we're entering right now. We take a step back to Web 1, the read cycle. In the early 90s through the beginning of the 2000s, we saw the opening of decentralized protocols, but very limited functionality, community governance, and not a lot of value accrued back to the network. However, we were brought information through websites, something we now had ownership of. Then fast forward to Web 2 or 2.0, 2.5, the right stage of those revolutions. In that mid 2000s to the early 2010s, we began to see siloed services and the rise of some of the largest technology companies to date. But a shift in governance from community towards corporations, a lot more advancement around functionality and technologies. However, all that value went back to big tech, but it brought us publishing and the ownership of a post. Fast forward to the beginning of the 2020s, and we started to see the surgence of Web3 and the own part of these revolutions, where we took a step back in time to bring us decentralized networks, those open protocols back to life, shifting back to a community governed type process, to continuing to advance and further advance, in fact, those functionalities and features in all the products and services that we like, and a dramatic shift in where value was. No longer was the value going to a corporation, no longer is the value going to nowhere. Instead, it is now going to the network's participants. And that brought a new level of ownership through tokens, whether that be digital assets, NFTs, or otherwise, of what's to come in the future. Which presents us in this great mass of building, something that we're here to talk about all day today and want to touch on from the mid 90s to today. We hear this story constantly of great companies are built in troubling times. Well, this, what you're looking at right now, is a chart of the S&P 500's performance from 99 to yesterday here in 2023, in the years that companies were founded. You can see very quickly there's great companies founded at every time, but notice on the pivot points, there are some of the greatest companies to come about in the last 30 years, some of the biggest, some of the most notable technology companies, and some of the greatest years of which companies to be built on troubling times. If you look at the right after the 2008 financial crisis, we had Bitcoin formed. Right after that, in 2009, we had the genesis block of Bitcoin and the beginning of a surge for 10 years of some of the greatest technology companies to be built, including many of those here in the Web3 space. And that all started after Bitcoin, with not only the Bitcoin layers, but also Ethereum to Cosmos, Polygon, Solana, Polkadot, Optimism, you name it. These companies were built in those times and in that rise. The stories of three eras comes from 99 to 2009. What is happening? What innovation can we create? What is that shift in Web 2? 2009 to 2019, we see the improvement of those. If anything, what is next? What do we need for technology and the internet to push forward? And then from 2020 to 2023, begins this new era, a new era of new companies and new technologies and new applications ready to be built, not just the next billion, but the next tens of billions of dollar companies to be built. Now, if we look at the ecosystem, the Bitcoin ecosystem of today, no longer is it just about Bitcoin as an asset, but instead an era of Bitcoin layers has begun. And the fact that Bitcoin itself as a network can be built on top of the read, the write, and now the ownership all has come together. With all of these different layers combined, Bitcoin itself can be activated as a network like never before. We've made a ton of progress as an ecosystem. Going back just a year ago, there were only tens of companies. Today, we're pushing over hundreds of companies. That critical infrastructure that we were needing years ago, and even as short as 2 years ago, is now here and improving. Those building blocks continually are added, and we're seeing the results of scale and flexibility. And yes, we've had setbacks. We've had a ton of negative headlines in industry redefining events. We've seen the collapse of major projects and capital. We've seen the continued debate around energy and environmental efforts. Things have slowed down. Those market caps have gone from 2 and 3 trillion back below 1 trillion for the time being. Regulation continues to be unsettled in a shifting environment for everyone. Governments continue to change their opinion on Bitcoin as an asset or Bitcoin as a network and decentralized protocols overall. But bipartisanship bills are proposed. States and countries continue to take their own stance, while at the same time projects continue to disembark from the US, but continue to arrive just as fast, which has led us to this phase change. Here in Web3, every 2.5 years, we go through a major phase change where technology improves and gets greater and takes us to the next phase of innovation, applications, and protocols, which all leads to a greater user adoption, which leads us today to the opportunity, an opportunity unlike that has ever existed, not just in Web3, but for the Bitcoin ecosystem as a whole and the user internet. The Bitcoin era has arrived. Looking at the last 2 years quickly, we had last year as the new foundations. We had the launch of Stacks mainnet. We had the beginnings or the resurgence of BNS and .btc domains. We saw the beginnings of new forms of decentralized finance and Bitcoin NFTs, along with bridges for the first time to Bitcoin and Bitcoin as an asset. Then at the end of 2022, we saw the Stacks 2.05 upgrade that took us into the era we're in right now. An era that can't fully be quantified because so many things are happening so incredibly rapidly. Only 12 hours ago, the Alex team launched their newest bridge, bridging Stacks and Ethereum to mainnet. In the beginning of this year, in January, we saw the opening of the Origins protocol, which brought us inscriptions, now being able to tie something physically down to the Bitcoin network. We saw a slew of applications, marketplaces, APIs, SDKs, you name it. It was launched in these last few months and will continue to roll out before we see the half point of the year in June. All around, opening up the opportunity for Ordinals and leading up to the Stacks 2.1 activation mainnet, which brings us the Nakamoto release and sBTC, which we currently have on testnet. But not just in Stacks, all those Bitcoin layers are starting to see new activations and new opportunities, whether that be Lightning's massive upgrades and Square along with Spiral, Block, all of their rollouts around opening up developer kits for Lightning and for Bitcoin. We also had approvals for interoperability when it comes to tying back to Bitcoin, the most stable, secure, and core network to date. So where does that leave us? What is to come in the second half of this year and the opportunity that awaits for the Bitcoin era? We have the sBTC mainnet, the trustless two-way peg, the opportunity for subnets and continuous stacking, new types of smart contract control measures and updates. Think about swaps to rollups on Bitcoin, already currently in the works. We'll see an unlock in the second half of this year. Also, the beginning trials of artificial intelligence or AGI embedded into DeFi applications. We'll begin to see the blend of inscriptions and ordinals tied to real world assets, while we see the rise of Bitcoin native assets. We'll see bridging across multiple ecosystems, not just on assets, but also tying back to the Bitcoin network itself, that stability and security in a core that all applications are looking for. We'll also begin to see the tie-in around Ethereum and more EVM compatible networks as well, which all leads us up to the halving for Bitcoin in 2024. So right now, the Bitcoin era not only has begun, but it's about to thrive. If you're not excited about building on Bitcoin, hopefully today and the rest of the discussions that we have for you will energize you and provide that spark that you may need to build your next application on Bitcoin.